It's 4 o'clock on a Monday, and you know what that means, don't you? It's time for another exciting episode of TAXITV Live. Yeah, baby. We're rocking, we're rolling. It's Monday, and I'm so glad to that I invited our special guest, Mr. Ronan Chris Murphy. Ronan,
great to be here.
Yeah, Ronan, we love having you here every year. We always try and get together and do one before the Road Rally because he will be at the Road Rally, our annual conference, November 6th through the 9th in beautiful Los Angeles. Ronan is...
I will never miss.
What?
It's the one conference I never miss.
Yep, absolutely. Oh, give me a quick level check.
Hello, hello.
Uh-oh, Liz says we're not broadcasting. That's a problem.
Oh.
A second ago. Let me check again.
Oh, that's never good.
All that witty banter lost.
There I am. Yeah, we're broadcasting. I think so. Guys in the chat room, tell me if you are seeing us. I hear you both. You are now. Okay. Got video here, so we're all good. Interesting. I can see and hear you. Okay. Anyway, here, let's do the intro again. It's 4 o'clock on a Monday, and you know what that means, don't you? It's time for another exciting episode of TAXITV Live. And Ronan, people are telling me that you were a little quiet. Do you want to bring up your gain on your end?
Let's see. I'm quiet still.
Keep talking.
Hello, hello, hello.
Yeah,
hello,
you're a little low.
Hello, 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 hello.
All right. How close is your mic to you?
2.5 feet.
Oh, can you get a little closer? It sounds a little roomy.
Yeah,
I feel it. Oh, I see. It's a
webcam, but I can.
Gotcha.
Don't pop over.
Don't worry about it. I brought you up on this end. It's just it sounded roomy. Okay. And look at me telling Ronan Chris Murphy all about microphones. Anyway, I'm glad that Ronan is here. Every year he comes in. Trick us, Michael. Bring yourself down. Ronan comes out for the Road Rally every year. Used to be a Southern California and moved to the Berkshires 2 years ago. Has it been that
about
long?
A year and a half.
Year and a half ago. Okay. Anyway, he is a multi-genre record producer and engineer that works around the world, mostly Italy and America, I believe. His diverse album credits include Guar, King Crimson on several albums, Terry Bozzio, Steve Morse, Oliver, Aurora, Jamie Walters, and hundreds more. His video game credits include Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, Yoku's Island Express, and Mafia 3. I've never heard of Yoku's Island Express. It sounds like something I would eat at, though. It sounds like a restaurant. Yes. He works in studios around the world, splits his time between homes in the Berkshires of Massachusetts and central Italy. There you go. So... always glad to have you back. And today we are simply going to talk about, what did I do with that printout? Of course, I put it somewhere. Now I can't find it. We're going to talk about production and mixing for sync because it's not the same as records. It's not drastically different, but there are things that you can do to have your music mixed for sync better, mastered for sync better, and more importantly, produced better for sync. So Ronan, jump on in and I'll just interject questions or thoughts when I have them, but I know I could actually go have dinner right now and come back and you'd be doing just fine.
Much more fun we do here. I think the one thing, talking about this is the production aspect of music for sync. And as you know, music for sync means a lot of different things, but a lot of opportunities for, replacing a temp track or looking for things, a film set in a specific, country or a specific time frame. And I think what a lot of people tend to do, the mistake they make, is just sort of latching on to maybe one or two elements of that era or the reference, and not really paying attention to all the other details. So I think a lot of times you'll, the dreaded thing of like, oh, it sounds dated when you're kind of doing something contemporary. But when you're looking at something that's going to be a part of a film, again, replacing a temp track, or, this needs to feel like it's from 1968 or 1982. There are very different elements that evoke that nostalgia, that emotion. And I would say the most important thing to do when you're trying to do that is really look at, your production scientifically compared to iconic things from that era. So you might think, oh yeah, it's kind of got a little shuffle feel, and there was a big shuffle feel song from that era. Great. And then you just sort of do everything else. But then you wonder why it didn't get placed or it doesn't fit. Well, there's a lot of things that go into it. One of the big things is reverb. Reverb is a huge part of how we can sort of identify when something is. So, in the early 80s, reverb was really prominent. It was also really bright. When we got into the mid 90s, reverb almost went completely away. And there were things in the 70s that had a lot of reverb, and in the 60s that had a lot of reverb, but they tended to be longer reverbs. And then even on rock stuff, and then in the early 80s, the reverb levels came up almost, but a lot of times they got a lot shorter. They were brighter and shorter. So it's that kind of thing where if you're looking at trying to do a song for a specific time frame or genre of music, one of the first things you can do is look at the reverbs. Is there a lot of it? Is there none of it? Is it bright? Is it dull? Is it long? Is it short? And, is it on just the lead vocal, or is it on everything? Like a lot of the hair metal stuff from the early 80s, everything is drenched in reverb. And then you'll have, early 90s, the vocals will be very dry, but the drums might still have reverb on them. So that's one of the big things you can do to really set something in a time frame. And again, this being outside of sync, I'm sure all of the members at some point have had that dreaded, I don't know, it just sounds dated. A lot of times when somebody's saying that sounds dated, they're saying they don't know how to articulate it, but they're saying the reverbs are inappropriate for the genre that we're doing.
Do any of the manufacturers of plugins, reverb plugins specifically, have presets like 60s drums, 70s drums, 80s vocals, rather than, chamber, plate, room, small room? I mean, I think you're onto something there.
That would be actually a really good idea. But again, it's super important on that too, is, even if you did have that as a guideline, looking at different things where, oh yeah, records coming from the United States versus coming from South America, even for the same era of time, let's look at, 2000. The kind of reverb that you would have on a rock or pop record made in the United States or London is going to have very different reverbs than something from Argentina or Spain or Italy, or even contemporary stuff now. The kind of reverb you're going to get music from Central Africa is different than a new record coming out of Brooklyn, making big stereotypes. So that's one of the most important things you can do, is just look at the reverbs of the references or of, the biggest hits. And the great thing now is we can, with the internet, we can say, hey, if somebody says, hey, this record's supposed to be in New Jersey in 1975, we can go on and, the internet and find out what were the top 10 songs in pop or rock in 1975 on this week, and then study those academically and look to see how you can do that. So reverbs are going to be a huge one. But another thing too is also like drum sounds are a big one. Again, you'll always find exceptions, but like kick drums tended to be, up until the early 90s, kick drums were big and round and kind of sat back as a support of the band. And then in the kind of early 90s, kick drums got more articulate, more attack on them, and they came forward in the mix. And snare drums, which through the 80s were super forward, they started to come back. So a lot of times I can tell when a hit record was mixed by the relationship between how forward the kick drum is versus the snare drum. So one of the ways you can make something sound more modern is pushing the kick drum up farther than you would in a record from the 70s. So like if you just get those two things about where the kick and the snare sit in a mix, and getting the reverbs kind of right, it's amazing how much you can just throw things into an era or a place. And those two things define the vibe and the sense of time and place of records in a massive, massive way. So one of the other things you'll look at too is just in terms of looking at time and place, the density of things and how much stereo is going on in a record. So if you're trying to reference something from the late 60s, there will be almost nothing stereo on that. It might be a stereo mix, but the guitars, I would bet money, are not stereo. Maybe the reverb, but probably not. It's probably a mono reverb. The drums are probably mono-ish, or it might be one drum overhead panned to the left side, snare drum panned off to the right side, and the kick drum in the middle. So a lot of people will go, oh yeah, I'm trying to evoke this 60s kind of thing, and they'll put in like 4 layers of stereo guitars. You could argue whether or not that is cool and creative, but that's going to set you in a really, really different kind of place on that. So that's another thing that will be huge. But one caveat I should throw in about that, and just being somebody who's been asked to sort of mix things stylistically, is if you're in a situation where you are actually working with a director or with a music supervisor, try and get a real sense of where they're coming from, because I've actually had situations where somebody a music supervisor type said, we want this to sound like a lost record by this band from 1967. I'm like, this is fantastic, and I'm going to do it exactly like that. And then they're like, well, why aren't the drums stereo? I was like, because you specifically asked me to make it sound like a lost track from this album that has no stereo drums on it. So that actually is one of the big things. So sometimes in terms of stereo or width of things, directors or music supervisors who maybe aren't technically articulate might not get that. But the reverb and the drum thing, it's amazing how that will translate to almost anything else you do kind of in the mix or in the production. Make sense?
Yeah, makes total sense. And what was the music supervisor's response when you said, well, they didn't have stereo reverb or whatever it was back then? Oh, okay, leave it? Or did he want you to add it?
Send me back. And the music supervisor was actually fairly hip on it. But the big boss on top, who wasn't a technically articulate person, but controlled everything,
yeah,
kind of had that vision for, no, it should sound big and lush like this. I'm like, sure, I know how to do that too, but that's a very different brief than the first one.
Yeah. We have a client who is the largest company, and if you know who it is, folks, don't blurt it out in the chat room, because people watch this that aren't Taxi members and can be somewhat impolite with the companies we work with, so just keep it under your hat. But anyway, they are the biggest supplier, have been for many, many years, of vintage music, anything from like the 20s or 30s on up to the early 90s. And we did a thing at the Road Rally probably 8 or 10 years ago now, where I had the owner of that company on stage, and we played stuff that the Taxi A&R staff thought were incredibly good recent recordings made to sound old, where people went out and got a legit McCartney bass, and they got a real AC30. They got all the right instrumentation. They used all the right kind of outboard EQ, mics, anything they could do to make it sound authentic. And it didn't sound authentic. It sounded authentic to us, but he nailed it in less than 15 seconds. And I said, how did you know? And he said, because the melodies were different back then. So he
Yes,
wasn't
absolutely.
only looking at the sonic aspects of it so much as people didn't write stuff with those intervals so much back then.
No, no, that is absolutely, absolutely true. And again, and I'd say even more important would be that, like, I was in this discussion, like, you have to bring up Amy Winehouse, who was, amazing. But, there's this idea of like, oh, she made these records that sounded like they were, the record from a girl group back in the 60s. And like, no, she did a lot of musical things that were very evocative of that. But there's no girl group that ever put out a record with a kick drum that big. So,
Right.
a lot of her stuff was very pop production and mixing. Maybe the reverbs were longer than we might expect from a pop record, but it was her vocalization, the choice of intervals and things that gave that such a strong, oh, this is a 60s girl group thing. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
And, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I recommend to everybody along those lines, go listen to the Lady Gaga Tony Bennett record. Hear incredible, obviously, vocals, but the production, the engineering and stuff, it's a record most people typically wouldn't listen to, but there's a lot to learn. And you made me think of that because you're right. Amy Winehouse's records, it was more the ethos that she was hijacking in a good way
Yep.
than it was the actual engineering or production on the record.
Yeah, and that's a tricky thing we run into. I mean, not only for sync stuff, but also even just for record kind of things. Um, People tend to want something that's evocative of things that they love or things that they aspire to. And the great example I always use is like John Bonham drum sound. And if John Bonham didn't have a drum sound, when they say that, they mean When the Levee Breaks or Kashmir. But
Right.
and he would have 9 different drum sounds on one record. But the thing about that is, as much as I love Led Zeppelin and think everybody involved did great work, people are like, oh my God, I want that John Bonham drum sound, referencing When the Levee Breaks. If I actually put that on a record for them, they would ask for their money back and they'd tell their friends I suck at my job because that was a very particular thing that sat in a very particular kind of arrangement. And if we tried to throw that into a different production, it just wouldn't work because, that record had those records, they had really thin guitars and they didn't have lots of layers on them. And they didn't, there was nothing dense about any of those except maybe the space around the drums. And just as a side note, not directly related, but I always say, the reason we love, and this is something you can do if you're trying to be super evocative, is the reason we love the drum sound of When the Levee Breaks is because we hear it naked with nothing else. So, go to that track and just drop in at 45 seconds into it and listen to the drums and go, yes, that is the drum sound I want on my record. It's highly, highly unlikely that will happen because those drums, as cool as they sound naked, once you put other stuff in there, they just get washed out and sound kind of like mush.
Yeah.
But we love it because we get that naked thing. And that's one of the things you can do, whether it's for sync or whether it's for, pop productions or something, is really showcase an element, maybe even right out of the gate, that is really evocative of that sound. A big strum of a 12-string Rickenbacker guitar really compressed through a Vox style amp. That's immediately going to give you a sound of, you're immediately going to think of the Byrds, most likely. But it's immediately going to put you in the 60s, kind of folky stuff, maybe Beatlesque. And even if you shift to something else, like after that intro, maybe even shifts over to something be very synth heavy, we're still going to feel that this track is very evocative of that time because we flew that flag and that big indicator saying, hey, this is where we at. This is the space we want to put you in, even if we end up going somewhere else. So that's one of the things when you want to be ultra evocative of some era, you put something naked in there and really show it off. It can be a huge, weird drum sound. It could be a 12-string guitar. It could be, a bugle with a ton of reverb on it. But when you have something very identifiable come right out of the gate, it really sort of sets the tone of people will think they're living for the rest of that 3 or 4 minutes.
I don't think the average musician, because musicians tend to think in terms of, I hope they love my music, is the thing that beats in their heart and sits at the frontal lobe of their brain. But from a music supervisor's perspective, it's, does it set you in a time or a place or a mood or something? And you were just talking about times and eras that you can affect by production and writing. I'm going to think out loud here and just chime in like we're hanging out at a dinner. But is there anything that people can do when a music supervisor is working on a film and it takes place where you are versus where I am? I'm in Los Angeles. You're in the Berkshires. I would imagine that people in the Berkshires, if you turned on like a regional radio station that's a 3-county radio station with that the stuff that they're going to play is going to appeal to the type of person that lives where you live now versus somebody in LA playing what would appeal to the LA audience. So let's think out loud about that. Is there anything that people can do production-wise? Not that they normally know. When people are submitting to production music libraries, they don't know how it will ultimately get used. It could get used 6 months from now or 6 years from now, and they don't know where. But when you are pitching, and if the film takes place, let's say, oh God, what was the one about the horrific in the woods of New Jersey years ago that was made for like, 20 grand?
The Blair Witch Project?
Yeah. Like if you were doing music for Blair Witch, what would those kids listen to is the first question I would ask myself before submitting. Whereas the average musician would think, I've got this awesome song, they're going to love it and put it in their movie, versus, okay, these kids are 17 to 19 years old, males and females. What do they listen to? And start there. And you could probably, you're backing out the equation of what it's written like, what it's produced like, what it's engineered like, and what it's mixed like.
Yeah. I mean, and there are certain things like, music in the flyover states. There are, bands like Creed and Nickelback and things like that. Like, if you're in Los Angeles and you listen to the radio, you'd think those bands don't exist.
Right.
But you go...
or you'll hope they didn't exist, maybe. Not to say Angelinos are biased, but...
But that's the thing, like you're not likely to hear that on a Brooklyn radio station or Los Angeles or San Francisco radio station. But you fly over Iowa, you're gonna hear that.
Yeah.
On that. Like that's kind of very machismo, like dude rock, is pretty big in the flyover states, where again, in the more hipster kind of areas, it's not. Like around here, actually, you can hear jam bands on the radio because, I'm 6 miles from Vermont here, and so, I'm in jam band country. Our local kind of cool indie station has 2 jam band shows a week.
Wow!
And that stuff will sort of even get snuck into regular rotation. But it's part of it. But also too is you also some of the times if you're thinking that way, you can do kind of stereotypes, because again, we think, okay, it's New Jersey. Okay, New Jersey is hair metal. New Jersey really hasn't been hair metal and all that stuff for a long time. But when we think about, what did New Jersey give us? They gave us, Bon Jovi and Bruce Springsteen, and of course, tons of other great stuff too. But, and I would say it's probably not even crazy if you're thinking that way to even somehow put that in your metadata,
Yeah. Oh, good point. Don't lie about it, but if you've got anything in there, people tend to over-exaggerate a little on their metadata, hoping that, the more stuff they put in there, that the more searches it'll show up in. But you'll also earn a reputation for metadata stuffing and being disingenuous with the library owner who's going to do searches for pitches to supervisors. So, if it's legit, put it in there. If it's not legit, don't stretch it.
Yep. But But I would say, part of this, since we're talking about how to prep stuff for sync, and I'm sure this has just been discussed before, but if you can, make stems, and also think about, if you are doing things specifically for sync, think about leaving space for the other stuff. Again, I'm a record guy, and that's like when I do video game work, that's always the frustrating thing, because I'm like, want to make these amazing, big, beautiful, lush mixes, and they're like, yeah, that's really nice and all, but there's this pesky dialogue stuff and sound effects. So a lot of times, so I sometimes I can't make certain elements as big as I might like them, but always make sure, and again, talk to your, if you sign with the library, listen to what they say more than anything I'll ever say on this. But always, if you're creating specifically for sync, be thinking about ways that they can get rid of elements, that they can get rid of vocals, that they can get rid of solos or bring them back. So always be looking at ways that this could be repurposed in other ways. When I do work in kind of the video game world, it's amazing how stuff is repurposed. Like, there's a stem where all of a sudden, the character's walking around in some city, and I'm like, wait, that's the guitar solo from that track. Like, yeah, it's found its own kind of new life in a way. But always kind of be thinking about being able to pull that apart.
One of our panelists for the keynote, I'm doing a thing. I don't have a rally scheduled right. Oh, yes, I do. Keynote panel. It's not the best music. We need the right music. And I've got a big-time music supervisor. I've got a library owner. I've got an executive producer who also happens to be a very legit composer and acts as his own music supervisor all the time or frequently, and a high-end TV editor that does really big-time TV shows. And the guy who's the executive producer has become a very close friend of mine over the last 2 or 3 years, to point where we go out to dinner 4 or 5 times a year maybe, and we text each other frequently. And he taught me something that never crossed my mind before, because he is a composer and an executive producer. Most importantly, he does a lot of his own editing, mostly on true crime stuff. And he talks about that at length, which is when he's composing a piece, he is putting it together so it can be taken apart later and used in a multi-purpose way. Exactly what you just said. Like, take that crying ethereal lead part that's in there that's a texture, but could I also use that at the end of a scene where you want to leave the audience hanging during the commercial break? So he explained that very well. I guess it's 2 years ago at the rally. He actually did some stuff and showed how he used that. But that is a point that deserves a lot more attention than it has traditionally gotten. I think a lot of library owners aren't aware of it. A lot of composers don't think about it. It's more work. But in the end, it makes your music more usable. And the more usable it is, the more financially rewarding it will be. So, yay.
Yeah, and the good thing is, when you kind of develop a workflow for this, thinking this way, once you kind of tweak your workflow, it doesn't have to be a ton more work. For a song, we're talking, adding 17 minutes to your total workload on something. So exporting stems, or there's a bunch of different ways that you can do that. But no, it's a really good idea. And the one part for me that's frustrating sometimes with video game music is, a lot of times the records, I love musicians together, same room. I don't mind the bleed. It's going to be cool. And especially, because I did a game called Mafia 3, which is set in 1968, kind of fictional New Orleans. And so we're doing all this real kind of rootsy, vintagey kind of stuff. And like, oh, yeah, have everybody in the same room bleeding around. It's like, nope.
Wow.
Absolutely. We need absolute isolation on everything. It's like, yeah, but that's not what they did at the time. It's like, yeah, but we're making this game now, and this is how we build games out. And It's the same thing for being a music soup. And, as much as I'm like, oh, but I like to make the real deal is, they were able to use my work to make a better game because we made those. So you have to think a little bit more about isolation in there. and and then just break things out into stems, and it's really not that much additional work to just put drums on their own stem, drums, bass, rhythm guitars, rhythm keys, solos, lead voice, and backing voice. And again, there are workflows where you can actually print all that stuff in real time while you mix, or you spend an extra 15, 20 minutes when you're done. And it's not that much extra work, and provides a whole bunch more flexibility if your music is going to be used for more than just making a record.
I know that you and I were talking about AI a little bit before we went live, and taking a stereo mix, turning it into stems or tracks. The words stems and tracks are used erroneously pretty frequently. But how can I say this in short without giving a 20-minute dissertation? I know somebody who's doing extensive work on analyzing music with all of the current AI detectors that are out there. He's doing it more to entertain himself than anything else, but he has found that even if you use an AI plugin, I'm trying to think of one, but I can't, or AI mastering or AI stemming process, those things will show up. So right now, when you copyright stuff with the Copyright Office, Library of Congress, and it's basically the honor system. Is this done by a human and not a robot? Yes, Your Honor, and you sign the little thing and off you go. Well, it's going to come to a point in time where they will start using the analyzers, AI analyzers, or detecting software. New and better versions of it will be coming out on a weekly basis because things are moving that fast, certainly a monthly basis, maybe a week is a little bit of an exaggeration. So all I'm saying to you is learn how to create tracks and stems on your own as a human being, because you're growing up or you're maturing as an engineer producer in an era when AI can make a lot of things really easy for you. But if you were to do that to much of the stuff in your catalog to create stems and libraries, oh, wow, Johnny, that's awesome. You gave us all these stems. Now we have all these other possible opportunities to market this music for. But then 5 years down the road, when AI detection is just inherently built into the mix stage of a TV show, and they still haven't solved the copyright problem, blah, 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 who the hell really knows where it's going? But you see what I'm saying is you could do a lot of work using AI mastering or AI stemming and have it come back to bite you on the butt later. So how do you feel about all that? I know as a mastering engineer, somebody that does a lot of mastering, I'm guessing you might have an opinion about AI mastering, and I would love to hear what that is and how do you feel about it in general?
I mean, there's no way I can provide an unbiased answer since, it's mastering is a big part of what keeps a roof over my head. So far, I've had multiple people hire me to do stuff that they've already done an AI approach for, and every time they've picked mine. But it's getting better all the time. And it's going to be good enough for most people eventually. And the one thing about the AI mastering is it doesn't have sort of the subjective feel to be able to sort of go, because certainly like my voice and your voice, if we both sang a song, there'd be certain frequencies in my voice that might be the more pleasing, and then the more annoying frequencies, and they might be completely different on yours. And so AI can't really do those things to go, oh yeah, on this particular vocalist, when they go into that range, this frequency gets problematic or it's harsh, or man, that's a really beautiful part of their voice. Let's enhance it or bring it out. So they can't bring sort of the subjective craft and art to it. But it's already really good. So if you just need something sort of loud that sounds more or less kind of like a record, it certainly does it. And and so we've got a little while left where people still want sort of the crafts people to kind of handle their mastering
as I was saying before we went live, AI is an awesome tool with somebody that knows what it is they want the tool to do. Give you and me a screwdriver, pliers, hammer, and a saw, and we could. I'm guessing you're pretty handy because you're a studio guy. I'm relatively handy. I just regrouted some stuff.
But nice of you to say that.
I just regrouted the tile in my shower floor over the weekend or last weekend. So handy enough. Point being that those same tools in the hands of a pro will get a much better result too. So I'm curious to see where the whole AI thing goes on levels beyond songwriting. And mastering is a good one, mixing, stemming things out. I believe that the more professional you are, the more experienced you are, the better prompts you will be able to give it because you know what you want, and it becomes your assistant at that point. Rather than that robot that's going to stab you in the forehead while you're sleeping and takes your work away. So
yeah, and I think and the one thing is the people with more experience will be able to see, oh, that's what it's done. That part was cool. That was not cool. Like my main day job is music, but I'm a semi-professional photographer, and there's all sorts of great. Hey, you can buy this photographer's your thing. And, you can do it and go, wow, that's kind of neat. That looks exciting. And, your average person might go, oh, yeah, I guess that's kind of cool. But a more experienced person might like, wow, that put way too much magenta in the skin tone. And so somebody who has a lot of experience can go, okay, let's go in and let's scale back the magenta because it's making the skin look a little unnatural there. And we even with the preset tools, which to me, as a photographer, they're just frustrating. I use them. I'm like, this is stupid. Let me just do it myself. But it's still that kind of thing where you can, hey, I just ran this through AI. And all of a sudden it realized, wow, it just really made the hi-hats harsh and in a way that's not pleasing. Well, let's go in and adjust that aspect of it. And also same thing too with arranging tools where because you will be able to just go, make a romantic string arrangement for this song, and it will go through and do it. And a good arranger is going to be able to go, well, that actually is kind of cool, but wow, how that's working against the lead melody is actually creating some tension that we didn't, that doesn't really support what's going on lyrically in the song. And look at, okay, can we reharmonize that? Maybe we should just go and have them take out all the thirds from the string arrangement. And that's going to make it sit back in the mix where it needs to be. So AI in the next version is going to get to a level where it's pretty darn good. We're a little ways off from it, from mastery, from being able to do what really experienced men and women can do with music to understand it and manipulate it. But it really is, I don't think you were exaggerating when you said better every week. We are at that pace of development in AI right now, and it's just here. There's, I think, as you said earlier, we can't put that genie back in the bottle at this point. So we just sort of figure out what does our world look like moving forward.
We're also at a stage that's a little analogous to the dot-com bubble of 99, 2000. It's not strictly analogous, but a little bit. And here's why, is because just because you can do something with AI doesn't mean that there's a market of people that are willing to pay for it.
Correct.
So it's exciting and new, and it's engendering a lot of experimentation, and some of the brightest programming minds are out there building really cool stuff. And I subscribe to 3 different newsletters about, what's this week's coolest AI thing. And I look at the stuff and go, that's awesome. How would I use it? And how much is it? Oh, it's $999 a year to access the software. If it were $9.99, I might take it for a year, but the value's not there for me at roughly $1,000 a year. So I think that once we get past this stage of unbridled exuberance about all the possibilities, that things will settle like they did years after the 2000 dot-com bubble burst. That AI will have matured in what it can do, the way people who program AI will have matured, and they're going to start thinking of things. They're going to back it out. They're going to look and go, is there a need for this? Let me build AI that solves the problem versus, isn't it cool that I can have AI do this? Oh, nobody needs that.
Yeah, and I don't want to spend the evening going too much into doom and gloom with all this. But my biggest concern with all this stuff is, I'm okay for a while because I've got legacy. I've worked on records people like and games people like and all of that. But my concern is like a college student in film school, who's making their low budget film. It's a 3.5-minute slasher movie that involves whatever their friend who lives in the next, down at the other end of the hallway in their dorm. So they're going to shoot that. Back when we were boys, you would find some music friend who could do something. It needs music, whatever that is. And so that music friend who sort of knew how to record something and play something would make that music. And so now that music friend would have had a credit and experience scoring a film, 3.5-minute student slasher, but they'd have that. So next time, hey, have you ever scored a film? Oh, yeah, some indie stuff. Oh, let's talk. And you get that next thing and the next thing. And now that same college student's going to go, okay, Suno, scary, creepy, music for out in the woods being chased by a werewolf.
Yeah.
And in 15 minutes, it will generate that. And it will be probably better than what, the guy or gal who lived in the next dorm could have done for you to make that music for your first indie film. So the whole generation of entry level, I don't see that existing. Within a couple of years, I think that entire generation of entry level won't exist.
Yeah, you're probably right.
And it's unfortunate because again, we've all had the luxury of being in situations where we got to make big mistakes that didn't have big consequences. We got to, learn as we go by doing some cool stuff and then screwing something up and then some cool stuff. And, 30 years later, like, okay, I pretty regularly do stuff that's kind of cool and not too many big screw ups. But that's, I think that's the big challenge with it.
Yeah.
Is a lot of smaller opportunities are going to go away. And again, I'm lucky because I got in a long time ago, and people continue to want to work with people at my level because we have legacy. And that's the gal that worked on one of my favorite records. Oh, that's the guy who worked on that really cool TV show. All of that. So we're okay for a bit. But my concern about AI is building up the next generation of creators. I hope they can get opportunities.
Do you have headphones or earbuds nearby? I can hear myself looping through on your end.
Let's see if this works.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Hello, hello, hello.
Okay.
You got me?
Hello,
okay,
hello.
cool.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Yeah.
Do you have me? Okay,
yep.
Great. Great.
Somebody asked, let's see, how we doing? We're halfway through the episode. People are asking questions. So let's do another few minutes and then we'll take some questions. But the loudness war, the LUFS war, it still rages on. And somebody asked, what do you recommend for LUFS? To which I don't know squat about LUFS. Back in my day, it was like get the needle so it tips into the red a little bit every now and then, but never stays there for more than a quick blip. But it also depended on, are we talking James Taylor? Are we talking a metal band? The dynamics of the genre of music and the tempo of the song and the instruments, all that goes into where your levels are going to be. So I'm bringing this back to around to when we do taxi, like Christmas compilations. We just sent one of those out. And the levels that come in on all these things are kind of all over the place. And I'll see somebody send in something where it's probably got a bunch of good edit points. Because, look, you want edit points. Music supervisors and editors working on TV shows and movies with music need edit points because it's extremely rare that they use a piece of music from beginning to end. So they are also in the habit of looking at waveforms, and you can see if something's got a lot of edit point possibilities. You can see if the middle section has more dynamics. You can see if it grows bigger and has a crescendo at the end. And in the mind of an editor that's got any sense of music whatsoever, they can look at that and quickly assess, this is something I should listen to because possibilities are apparent in that waveform. Whereas if you're delivering a brick wall because you're trying to win the loudness wars, you've eliminated that editor from visually connecting with your music long enough and well enough to determine whether or not they want to hear it. So is there a way to sort of win the loudness war and leave the dynamics in a waveform?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because when we talk about the world of records, when we talk about the loudness war and why do we have, there are very good reasons why you should leave things dynamic. And there are white papers written on it. There are debates on the internet and all of that with lots of really interesting, valid points. When we're talking about records, it's really important to remember that the most successful people in the world aren't bothering with that discussion at all. So my guess is if we looked at, the top 10, every one of them, every song in the top 20 right now, most likely is way, 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 way louder than what the smart guys on the internet say you're supposed to do. And because the hit makers just completely ignore all of that. And you can view that as a good thing or a bad thing or irrelevant, but it is really important. Like if we were talking about okay, every team that wins the World Series trains this way, and then but they shouldn't train that way. Yes, but they're in the World Series next week. So that's an important thing. But one of the things you could do, and again, anything I have to say is superseded by anything the people who run your library say. But one of the things you could even do on that front is if you were submitting a song as a package with stems, etc., you could have radio master, and then you could have dynamic master, giving the music supervisor. Because one thing to keep in mind is if they just slotted temped in a big pop tune right now, and they're just used to that slamming when the characters come into the dance club or there's that fight scene, and then you submit they temp in your lovely dynamic just like the guys on the internet said you should do, it's going to sound weak, it's going to sound wimpy, it's going to have all of that. So one of the things I would think you could do if your library accepts it is to have here's your final mix with radio master loud, and then final mix with dynamic master, and then your stems. And one thing to keep in mind with stems too is the tricky thing with stems is you shouldn't really make all your stems really loud because they won't blend back in the same way.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. I want to talk about that, go into more detail. Finish your thought and then let's talk about that specifically.
Yeah, so I would suggest having both available, especially if it is pop, rock, heavy metal, punk, any of those kinds of things. But truth is, country, if you want something just smashed to the gills, look at a country record. Providing opportunities or having them available, or even if you have your own stuff on a server that says, dynamic master available, blah, 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 at this link, just giving these people as much flexibility as they need. But it does get a little tricky when you do stems. So if you put, have your whole mix going through a brick wall limiter, which almost any commercial production will have, it can be a little problematic if you leave that on while you export your stems, or depending on your process.
That's exactly where I'm going, and I see Pat Wara is circling around that same question as well in the chat room. So back in my day, you would make sure that your master fader is right there at 0. And the relative position of all the faders that comprise the blend of instruments in your mix, leave them where they're at. And if it's an automated mix, which virtually everything today is, let the automation do its thing. and you're exporting, let's say you're exporting every one of your 27 tracks, or you're doing stems of drums, guitars only, keys only, whatever, never touch any faders whatsoever. Because, and you might say, well, that synth pad, is barely moving the meter, the mix bus meter. So I feel like that's a problem. Well, you're in digital, so there is not that much of a problem. The noise floor is going to be next to nothing compared to what we dealt with back in the days of tape. So everything has to stay relative. So if your inclination is, well, that's barely moving my mix meter, I'm going to bring it up so that it's coming in just a little bit under zero and it looks nice and healthy. You've completely ruined the blend or balance that you had. Okay, so let's say we listen to Michael Laskow's law of don't touch the freaking faders. Just hit play and bounce, make your stems that way. But, so I've got my stems, but now I've mastered the mix. And that's going to affect the ultimate level of this, let's call it a stereo master. Let's leave 5.1 or whatever 0.1 out of this for the sake of sanity. So how do you deal with that when you've created your stems and it's pre-mastering stage and your levels are all cool and you've followed those, keep your balances where they're at stuff. But now the track that you're sending to the library is the mastered version, and then they're handing it to a music supervisor. I love it. And then 3 days later calls up, says, by the way, I need stems, but the stems aren't going to match that zero level. How do you, I've never had to deal with that. How would you deal with it?
Well, I mean, and this is a good time to, it's very weird that this is a controversial thing. But again, for people who might be unclear about it, there's a weird thing happening where people are starting to use the word multitracks and stems interchangeably, and they are absolutely not interchangeable terms. And there's always going to be some young person who say, yeah, okay, boom, or whatever. But they are just very functionally different things. A coffee cup.
Can you take a little magenta out of my face? I just went very pink when you said boomer.
But yeah, I mean, a coffee cup and a dinner plate are not the same thing. They're both, they're different. So the multi-tracks are all of your individual things. Here's your clarinet track. Here's your snare drum top. Here's your snare drum bottom. All those are the multi-tracks. And the stems are all submixes of individual groups of things.
Thank you.
So when you've mixed your record, when we say, hey, the drum stem, a drum stem should be one stereo track, or if you're doing 5-1, but one stereo track that has all the drums and nothing else in it. And your rhythm guitar track will have just the rhythm guitars and nothing else. And what you should do is export those in a way, or print those, or whatever your workflow is, that if we line up all these stems, here's our drum stem, our bass stem, rhythm guitar, saxophone solo, background vocals, we just line those up at zero. They should pretty much make the stereo mix. They'll never be exactly the same if you've done compression on your stereo bus. So they'll be slightly different, but they should be pretty much the same. They should sound like an unmastered version of your mix. And as Michael's alluding to, you might have that thing where you have a synth pad that's barely in the mix, but just glues some guitars together, or just sneaks in a little bit of dissonance into that creepy bridge or whatever. It should be really, really low. You might look at the waveform and it looks like there's nothing there, but when you solo it, you hear a little bit of synth. So the important thing is that those all come back. When you line those up together, all at zero, it should be pretty much the mix that you intended. That doesn't mean that's the mix that's going to get into the TV show, because one of the reasons they want the mix is not only to be able to get rid of the vocal and there's dialogue, but maybe they don't want big pounding drums. Maybe they want the drums to be a little mellower, tucked in, or more subtle in that scene, and the guitars more forward. But that's the thing. So if you get those all together, and then put a brick wall limiter, boom, and you can bring that up to kind of commercial levels. On projects where I know that that stems are going to be an important part of my deliverable, is I kind of tend to do more group busing, or group compression versus master bus, because anybody who kind of grew up making rock and roll records, especially on a console and an SSL, is smash the quad compressor a whole bunch, and that's a big part of your sound. But the weird thing about that is when you run a whole mix through that compressor, and the drums make everything come down, your guitars are coming down, your background, everything is coming up and down a little bit. So when if I run stems through that, the drums are still going to make that compressor come up and down, but it's not going to do that with the backing vocals or the guitars. They will end up having different levels because they're not being brought up and down by the compression that's being kicked in by the loud guitar or bass. So when deliverables have stems, that's a real important part of it, like video game work or like sync kind of stuff. I find myself, okay, I'll be a little more aggressive on the drum bus compression, or a little bit more compression on the background or things like that, so that less of my overall compression is happening on the full stereo bus and more on some of the individual buses.
By the way, don't let me forget, everybody, around the end of the show, I am going to give away a free consult with Ronan at the Road Rally. So some lucky viewer is going to win a sit down with Ronan. You can play him what you've got and ask him any questions, specific questions about your music, from a production, mixing, mastering, anything that he's capable, which is quite a lot.
Yeah.
He will be happy
and even
to
also, or even if it's biz related stuff or things like that. So, and anything you want to pick my brain about, if you win, I'm yours for the hour.
Awesome. I also want to mention, this is for you, Ronan. I mean, I guess everybody else can listen in too. Where am I doing that? A Road Rally thing that I'm telling you, this year's panels in the ballroom are the best I've ever done. Ever. On Sunday at 2:15 p.m. through 3:30, I'm doing a panel called Game On, breaking into video game music, with a Taxi member named Reed Heidel, who actually composes video game music for very sophisticated slot machines, where they used to use, like 8-bit or 16-bit chiptune kind of stuff, sounded like Mario Kart. Now they're using full-on lush orchestral stuff or orchestral hybrid stuff. So he does that for a full-time gig. And two other AAA game composers that have worked on all kinds of big stuff. And one of them is an engineer, producer, mixer, composer. The other one's primarily composer. And their names are Nearshore and Hillel Teplitsky. I got to practice that. Anyway, that's going to be a great panel for those of us who are technically inclined. So if you're not busy doing something else at the rally, you should be in the ballroom for that one. I think you'll really, I've spoken to these guys on the phone. They're all great.
Angel keeps me pretty busy, but I'll try.
Yeah. Well, on Sunday is usually a day where we don't have a lot of classes going on or mentoring or anything. So that's good. Anyway, let's do some questions here. Okay, you guys know the drill. If you've got a question, put the word question in all caps followed by a colon so that it pops up easier. Douglas Ricketts had a Radio Shack realistic brick mixer. Interesting. I used to buy a lot of stuff from Radio Shack. Before that, there was another company. Nothing I liked better than buying integrated circuits where they took like transistors, resistors, and put it all in an ice cube tray, and then poured in molten plastic around it with just the leads coming out of it. Okay, question. There is not a question. That's Liz showing everybody how to write a question. Okay, here's one.
And by the way,
yeah,
just to say, I'm usually in the bookseller's room. I usually have a table. So at the Road Rally, if you want to come say hello, if I'm not teaching a class or doing some mentoring, I'm usually there. You can come hang out with Liz Redwing and I.
I hope she's not watching today's episode. She's going to be very upset you couldn't pronounce her name after like 30 years. Okay. All right. Keith Sumner wants to know, hi, do you have effects returns on when creating stems? Legit question.
That is a fantastic question. Absolutely. And you need to, in terms of how you set up your effects and do your routing, this is really important. So when you create a stem, whatever effects are on that instrument should be on that stem. So if you've got, your snare drum going out to a reverb, when you print the stem, that should do it. If you've got a bunch of delay on the guitar solo and you've done that routing out to an aux send and coming back in, that should absolutely be part of the stem. So keep that in mind if you are delivering stems, because you might be inclined to do things like, hey, I'm going to send this effect pre-fader, that snare drum's going to go out, and also this is going to go out pre-fader from the saxophone, and they're going to go out to the same interesting reverb or effect. Well, depending on how you make your stems, soloing or muting things, you might accidentally put saxophone reverb into your drum stem. So, but absolutely, again, the effects on an instrument are part of the stem. So any reverbs, any delays, any compression that are key parts of that, you should make sure that you deliver those as part of the stem.
Great answer. Here's one from John Hope. Hi, Ronan. Do you gain stage your tracks before you start your mixing, or is there a when not to gain stage on what? That the little your writing could be improved, John, but we think we got it.
I know exactly what he's asking for. Absolutely. When something shows up for me to mix, the first thing I'm doing after kind of organizing and labeling and making sure that's all right is I am gain staging everything. Anything that's really high level, I'm going to bring those down for amount. Anything that's really low, I'm going to bring those up. So I'm generally looking at getting my tracks in a place where they kind of peak around -6 dB full scale. So even if a track is going to be like, oh, there's an acoustic guitar on this rock song that's going to be really, really low in the mix, I'm going to bring it up to around that range, again, peaking around -6, because that means it's going to hit my plugins or my outboard at an ideal level. And then that's what my fader is for in terms of making that loud or quiet. I'm also, if I have a track where I know that it isn't going to end up being really dynamic, where I like vocals on rock and pop, they tend to be super consistent. So if I'm looking at a vocal and I see, there are parts where it's just super loud, whether that's a syllable or, certain lines are way louder, I'll actually go in and gain stage everything to get those a little bit more consistent, allowing me to use my compressors more as kind of creative tone tools versus making certain words louder or quieter. So absolutely, that's one of the first things I do even before I start doing anything creatively with mixing. I'm getting my gain staging to be in kind of a good even range that's going to hit my plugins and outboard in a good way.
You said something very early in the show about experience or ears or something, and we were talking about the AI stuff. I've got to say, I would love for you and some other engineers that started out in the 70s or 80s, have a shootout where you get an hour to mix something and you got a guy over here with a full-blown digital rig, with just all the great plugins, blah, blah, blah. And then you've got an old guy with a 32 fader MCI 600, now anything but an MCI 600, a 32 fader Neve console SSL, something pretty basic, no plugins whatsoever, and using no automation. And I'll bet you 10 out of 10 people would pick the mix done by the old dog on the old gear, not because it sounds amazing, but because we had to learn balance. which is the heart of every mix. It's not about the outboard and side chaining. All those things are neat, but if you don't have years of experience to go, oh, a Rickenbacker bass in this key, not that you keep a logbook of this stuff, you just absorb it over time, but you know that a Rick bass with flat wound strings playing a song in this key at this mid-range tempo, you just automatically reach for the right direct box, and you already are pretty zoned in on where the EQ and the compressor should be, just from experience and having good taste, which is learned over thousands of mixes. So my point being, for all of you, because somebody just said, I'm fairly new to this, and so my personal advice to anybody who's new is don't get into lots of plugins. Just go with basic EQ, reverb, and compression to start until you get balances where you go, that kind of sounds like a record. And do that over and over. It could be a year of doing it for a couple or a few hours a day, and you will become the master of your domain. And now that you've got that locked away here and here, now you can use all those fancy tools even better because you know what it is that you want to hear. Am I nuts?
Yeah, no, but when I'm mixing, the first part of my mixing is all just panning and levels. I spend a lot of time doing panning and levels, and then a lot of time doing subtractive EQ, and then more panning and levels. And I usually am working to get something that sounds like a record, just with levels, panning, and subtractive EQ. I'll move into dynamics after that. But I'm probably well into 60, 70% of my final mix before I start doing any kind of fancy stuff on it. And I don't mean like if we have to tune the vocals or whatever, but in terms of it, just with levels, panning, and subtractive EQ, I should have something that sounds pretty darn good. And once I put in some dynamics, compressing the vocals, drum bus, and all of that, it should pretty much sound like a record. And then I'm using all that other stuff, whether it's reverbs, delays, choruses, spatial, this kind of stuff. That's all kind of extra creative things to, meld the vibe of it. But one of the problems that a lot of people will start mixing, go, oh, I'm going to have a really cool reverb on this lead vocal, and yeah, that delay is going to have this on this guitar, and it'll be so cool to chorus phaser the toms or flange the toms, and all groovy. But the problem is when you put all those effects on, they start to smear everything. And when you've started smearing your imaging, it's much harder for you to tell that, hey, there is a problem with how the kick drum works with the bass guitar. There is a problem with how that piano is working with the guitar. And so I want to leave those things off until I've got a really amazing foundation. Everything is really complementary. And then once that is just rock solid, then I can start using all those other kind of things for flavor, mojo, vibe, all that kind of stuff.
As my dad, I've quoted him 100 times over the years on TAXITVs. My dad always said, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And that's so true, especially when it comes to mixing, even more so than recording. Here's a question. Would it be possible to have Ronan as a guest for Is This Track Ready for Mastering, for tracks that may not be, perhaps he could offer some ideas for improvement? Are you talking about at the Road Rally, like as a mentor? Or are you talking about a TAXITV episode? Not really sure what you mean. Come back at me, Michael Bruce. Hey, there's piano, guitar, voice question. Ronan, can you please explain how you use pre-faders and post-faders? That's a really good question because people never ask it.
Yes, and assume he's talking about busing or aux sends. And again, the world of the DAW is a little bit weird because busing and auxes get used interchangeably. And if you came up on console world, they meant different things. Mm-hmm. But essentially, we're talking, with an aux send or a bus, how a lot of DAWs will define it, is when we have something post-fader going out to a reverb, and we turn our vocal up or down on the fader, that will adjust the amount of that track being sent to the reverb. So the balance we have between the reverb and the voice, when we turn the voice up and down with its own fader, will stay the same. That's what we want to do most of the time in making records. With live shows, that's completely different, because you want to send out your stage mixes or even your studio headphone mixes pre-fader, meaning when you adjust the fader up and down, it doesn't change that level. Most of the time we're doing things in pre-fader on record making stuff, except when we're not. So we might have a thing where, say it's the ending of a song where there's a solo kind of going out, and we want to, as the song starts to disintegrate at the end, that guitar solo, we bring the guitar down and just the effects are left. So it allows us independent control of those two things. But I would say in the world of making records or making mixes for sync or for video games, 98% of the time I'm doing things post fader.
Okay.
So that when I adjust those levels, they maintain the balance I've set up with dry sound to affected sound.
Here's a question from Juan Avila. When do I have enough stems, and when is it too much?
Ask your library if you already have that. But generally speaking, if you have drums, bass, kind of rhythm guitars or rhythm keys, solos, lead voice, and backing voice, if you have those, that will cover you for almost everything you're going to run into. It's at some point, like if you're doing deliverables for film, which isn't as much like soundtrack world, which isn't so much of my world, they sometimes want insane amounts of control. So if you're working for a specific, director or composer, they'll let you know. But if you've got bass, drums, rhythm instruments, guitars and keys, solos, lead vocals and background vocals, maybe percussion separate, or maybe blend that in with the drums, but that's going to cover most of what you need. And so for most deliverables, what you'll need, and also too, that will cover you for most, things like if somebody needs a remix, like 2 years later, hey, we really love this song, we want to release it, but man, we mixed those vocals way too loud. Well, okay, you could just pull up those stems, tuck down the vocal a couple dB, submix those, and you're done. And that'll cover most of your bases. But it's how many stems, it just kind of depends on how neurotic you are.
I think some people, and I'm not saying this to put down library owners in even the tiniest little bit. I'm really not. It's going to sound like it, but I'm not. They don't know the answers to some of the questions that have been asked about library owners today because they're not very technical, some of them, maybe even many or most of them. Their biggest concern is having music that is sellable, licensable, usable. So that's where they concentrate their energy, plus fielding the calls from the supervisors and making pitches. So they don't sit around thinking about how many stems they would like to see. There might be some that are technically inclined enough and have the right clientele that becomes an important issue. They could give you a better read up, but don't expect the broader group of music library owners to all feel the same way or have the same answer or even give a damn.
And one thing a little bit related to this, just to throw out, is for your important stuff, always commit your virtual instruments to audio. Always, always, always commit virtual instruments to audio, because eventually you might decide, I don't like working in Pro Tools anymore. I want to move to Cubase. And now that doesn't work over there. Or I've got, wow, this really cool indie company made this VST virtual instrument that I love and was the perfect thing on this record. And then Apple decided to update the operating system, and that old plugin is no longer compatible. So yeah, it's heartbreaking when you kind of open up something, there could be an opportunity. Hey, we love this track, but it's got this amazing vibe, which could be from that super cool synth that you did. And they say, we love it, but can we get stems, or can we get it without that really loud bongo solo you put in there, whatever it is. And you go back and all of a sudden that really cool VST instrument you worked with doesn't work in your rig anymore, and you've lost the opportunity. And you can try and go back and create it. And one cool thing too that you can for really important stuff is, like, I'm sure all the DAWs can do this, but like in Pro Tools, you can commit tracks. So you can select a whole bunch of tracks, and it'll pretty much just print them with all of the plugins you've got on them. So you essentially have, another set of multitracks that have most of your processing baked in. So if you do have these opportunities or obligations down the road, there are ways to kind of get back there, even if your plugins, don't work with your current DAW or operating system.
I have a close friend, Rob Shirelli is my best friend, and he happens to, just by coincidence, live like 4 houses away from me, and he's got a mix room where he works on famous records all day long, every day. And I was over there the other night. We went out to dinner. I went back to his house with him to look at something in his studio. And he has a Gates compressor, an original old tube Gates compressor that, are well loved by people who love vintage gear. And I remember him once telling me he barely used the outboard for mixing because it's not repeatable. It's not part of the mix memory, automated mix memory. And so the other night I said to him, "So why do you keep it?" He goes, "Dum-dum, I use it when I lay down tracks. Like if I'm laying down a bass track, I'll record with the Gates and lay down the audio track of it, as well as and I'm sure that would be true for a synth part. Maybe lay down the audio track, maybe lay down a track that goes through the Gates compressor or outboard EQ or whatever, and lay down. So MIDI, audio, and then effects, and have 3 choices later when you need them.
Yep. Yeah, and when I use outboard, I actually use outboard because when I use outboard, I actually run through it and I record it back into a new track. It takes a little extra time, but there's I really want that LA2A on that lead vocal. I'll go out to it, record that back to a new track, and that way, 3 months later, I'm sitting in an airport in Rome and somebody says, "We need this new mix." I can open up my laptop, tweak a few things, and load it up on the airport Wi-Fi, because everything is committed into audio tracks.
Right. Let's see. I'm looking. What are your this is from Colin O'Brien. What are your recommended sources of info for learning the basics of mixing? There's a lot of them out there. And just to let you know, we've got 13 minutes left. We got to do the giveaway. We could go 5 long. I've got a meeting after us, but we can go an extra 5 minutes if you're good for that. So, with all that in mind and those constraints built into your answer, who are some of the people that teach courses? Well, you have Recording Boot Camp. There's one that I could personally endorse.
I wish I had a really good answer for that. I mean, obviously I have a bias because I teach workshops and stuff around the world. So obviously I'm biased in favor of my own thing. But one of the things is I think the best thing you can do is study great mixers. Really look at records that you think are amazing and really look at what they did. Versus, like how bright are their guitars or how dull are their guitars? Are their vocals really wet with reverb or are they really dry? And look and try and create those kind of things. Certainly, as you go, and you might hear a mixer talk about, "Oh yeah, I love to push up XK on my background vocals to get them to pop." Then you go, "Oh cool, I can try that thing." But so much of that you can learn just by really studying the mixes of, as a scientist, of the great mixers who make records that you think are kind of amazing. And it's tricky trying in the world of the modern world we live in. YouTube and social media punish people for making in-depth good content. Mm-hmm. So if you really work to make really good stuff, I'm going to spend a few months working out, it's going to be 20 minutes of amazing mix information. You'll be punished for that, because they want you to just put out stuff every day to feed the algorithms. So there's so many people out there. Hey, and here's a trick you need to do for such and such radio ready this, and it's like you run the kazoo through then, and they've just made up something because they need to feed the algorithm. So I would say mostly again just try and find people who don't hype stuff, and they're like, hey, here's the thing you can do to get your guitars to tuck in behind the voice a little bit better. And usually the less interesting or high tech the advice is, it's probably more trustable. Because a lot of people say, sometimes I'll get involved in like a discussion online, like, hey, I'm having trouble getting my lead vocals to pop through the mix. So there's just like all of these, well, you need a multi-band spatializer side chained off and I'm thinking, I don't know, I couldn't get into MIT, so I have no idea how this would work. And I'll chime in like, you probably want to carve out some room in the guitars that are getting in the way of vocals. So maybe duck the mid-range on the guitars and like, it seems like I'm kind of being a snotty asshole, but in reality, that's usually a bigger thing in terms of getting vocals to pop out of mix. Isn't some high-tech solution. It's that there's probably keyboards or guitars that are getting in the way and masking it. And if you carve those out, all of a sudden your vocal naturally pops out without actually having to make it louder in the mix.
Thank you. That was exactly my point with talking about having boomer mixers competing against more technologically advanced, or people using more technology in their mixes. You learn that stuff by solving problems and making mistakes over and over, and it is never one size fits all. If it's a legato singer-songwriter thing with a very wispy, lilty female vocal, the same thing is not going to work for that as somebody doing a Creed-style rock track. So you have to work in all those different genres, make mistakes on other people's dime, never admit it. They won't know the difference anyway. We've all professional engineers have that moment where you go, that didn't work out very well, but nobody else seems to notice. So now I know. Next time I won't take that approach. It's true. All right, here's one from Corey Levine. Ronan, what are your suggestions for loudness with MIDI solo piano while keeping it dynamic at the same time?
There's a couple things. Again, as a general rule, dynamics and loudness are contradictory things. It's sweetness or savory, sweetness and spicy. They're kind of contradictory things. But one of the things you could look at is, if you want to keep something dynamic, is there one part of that you can sacrifice? Like, are there a few notes or a couple passages in the solo piano thing that, you could compromise and bring those down a few dB, allowing you to bring everything else up? So you might want to look at that trade-off, and does it need to be super dynamic? Because most things that have the natural dynamic of an instrument sound kind of amateur to a layperson. So, can you sacrifice that? But the one thing too is also keep in mind different frequencies feel loud, because when we talk about loudness outside of LUFS descriptions, loudness is how loud something is a subjective thing. That's like how pretty somebody is or how handsome somebody is. It's like, that's kind of a subjective thing. But we hear different kind of frequencies as kind of louder or more forward just with the way our ears work. So if you had a solo piano that was brighter and had more transient attack, that's actually going to sound louder than something that's a little warmer or duller and has a little softer attack. If you want your piano to sound, you're doing a piano and you want it to sound louder, take your foot off the sustain pedal and the piano will naturally feel louder or more present in a mix, even if it's at the exact same level. So that's one of the things where you might notice, like if you go and use analysis tools on some of your favorite rock and roll records, you might look and like, these are identical, but one just sounds so much louder. Well, one of them might be a lot brighter and have a more scooped out low mid-range, which makes things, again, Chris Lord algae mixes, super scooped, really bright and aggressive, and they sound super, super loud. And even louder than another rock record that's exactly the same, where they've kind of kept things a little bit, warmer or smoother sounding. So just look at what you can sacrifice in terms of some very peak passages. And if you need it to be louder, look at a brighter or less sort of low mid kind of piano.
Great advice. All right, one more and then we'll do the giveaway. This one's from Charles Newf. When submitting to a brief, this one may be more of a taxi question. The screener says, what I really like about this is the tonal quality. Is that what you're talking about, the balance of the mix? Charles, it's impossible to say without seeing the context of the entire feedback that you've gotten from the screener. Tonal quality could be tone of your voice, the overall vibe, if you will. Vibe's a very West Coasty word, maybe, but the vibe is like, I like the way it makes me feel, and it sounds like it's giving me a nice hug while I'm listening to it. That's vibe, and tonal can be kind of like in that same thing. So I don't think that the screener is talking about what's the word I'm looking for, about like, they would have said it's a well-balanced mix versus tonal quality. So if they were talking about the mix, they probably would have said well-balanced mix. Now, maybe you had a really woody-sounding, warm acoustic guitar and the bass that married perfectly to that. Maybe they meant that, but honestly, without more context, I don't know. I'm going to toss one more your way. Do we have one more question? This one's from Gloria Covington. Hey, Gloria. Where does using a compressor come in within the scheme that you just mentioned? Ooh, this question could have been asked 20 minutes ago. I don't know. Talk about context. I don't know, because sometimes we don't get a question for 10 minutes, and then we get like 15 of them in short order. Sorry, Gloria. You'll have to ask them at the rally. Ooh, it just jumped down on me, too. All right,
come see me in the bookseller's room, and I'll give you an answer.
Yeah, I'm not.
Or maybe
honestly,
an hour with me.
We haven't even gotten that far yet. We are ahead. By the way, Liz, can you put the link to the Road Rally stuff? For those of you who don't know, we've now posted who the mentors are, who's going to be at the mentor lunches, what the classes are, who the teachers are, and the main ballroom are all up. We have 2 or 3 more documents to get up on the website, but we're about 10 days earlier getting that stuff out than in previous years. So for those of you who are like, I don't know, it seems kind of far away, it's a $387 plane ticket, will it really be worth it? The answer is yes, it will be. I mean, anybody who's been to a rally or few, or like Matt Vanderbo, 14 of them, and some other people have been to like 25 of them. This is our 29th rally. When I tell you that this is going to be the best one ever for the quality of content that we're going to present and the people presenting it. Last year, I felt good. I quietly said to the staff, I think this one's going to be really good the day before we walked out the door for blast off. I told him 2 weeks ago, I'm super confident this one's going to be better than last year. So I wouldn't say that if I thought there was any chance of me embarrassing myself by not delivering on that promise, but just great panels, great people delivering the stuff. And you're getting a little tiny sample of Ronan. He's one of, 50 presenters this year, and they're all in their various things that they present this knowleddon't. So, all right, let's find out.
I've been a full-time pro for over 30 years, and I don't kind of fly in, do my class, and get out. I stay for every bit that I can, because it's kind of, even with my level of experience, it's amazing how many just great people I've connected with, collaborators, clients, people I've hired to do stuff. And it's the one conference that I just will not miss every year. I sort of like blow off international travel and stuff if it's going to compete with the Road Rally.
Thank you for that. We love having you there. And in all the years that we've known each other, all the years you've done TAXITV and the Road Rally, I have never heard anything but glowing compliments about you. And that's because you really, truly are a master of your craft. You're not somebody who's reading other stuff on a forum and regurgitating it like you know what you're doing. You actually do know. Okay, let's pick a winner to see who gets a console. You know what? Did we say an hour or a half hour? I don't remember.
Hour. I mean, I don't know what you said, but let's do an hour.
Okay, 1 hour with this gentleman. You can play him your music. You can ask him about your mix. You can ask him about technical advice. You can ask him about music business advice, all that, anything. And by the way, he is one of the mentors at the Road Rally as well. So even if you don't win today, you could get in line and sign up for your one-to-one mentor, and you could pick Ronan. And there you go. Do you do the eat and greet lunches as well?
Yes,
So imagine,
I usually do. So
imagine this: people who've never been to a road rally that are watching this episode right now, and you're thinking about coming. Imagine having 6 people of this level of knowledge coming to spend 15 minutes each at your table. It's either 6, 7, or 8 people that rotate around. So generally 8, 9, or 10 taxi members at the luncheon table. And then every 15 minutes, we move the mentors clockwise around the room. So, I mean, there are just so many great ways for you to move your career forward on so many different topics in a single weekend. And again, I literally don't make 1 penny by you showing up. I don't lose a penny if you don't. We just want our members to be as good as they possibly can so that more members get deals and talk about how much they love taxi. So is it self-serving? Why, yes, it is. But at least I admit it publicly. All right. So here's what we're going to do. Asia, Steely Dan, somebody says, yeah, that's my go-to for checking out a room. It's like, put on Asia. Babylon Sisters, another one. Oh, the background vocal texture on Babylon Sisters. Oh, I could talk for a week about that. All right, here's what you do is you're going to type the letter R in, and you can only type it 1 time. Don't sit there and go R, 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 because then you'll sound like a pirate. And then Liz, who's sitting about 50, 75 feet away from me down the hall, looking at her computer. She's going to look at this chat room. She's going to go like this, and she's going to go bink. And whoever she goes bink on is who's going to win. If you're not coming to the road rally, did I say?
We're doing it at the rally. So
at the rally. Yep, absolutely. Okay, let's find out who's coming to the rally. I'm telling you, do not miss this year's rally.
And can members still bring a guest with them?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for reminding me. A lot of road rally goers. And right after we announce the winner, road rally goers, tell your friends who are in the chat that maybe think, I don't want to spend the money on the flight, or I don't know, I don't do well in crowds. Tell them what they'd be missing. All right, Liz, looks like they've stopped chime up. There's a late one, Toby Scott. By the way, I'm going to take next week off from doing TAXITV. I believe that I need a Monday where I can finalize all that road rally stuff. So no show next Monday, but hang on while Liz is doing her thing over there. I have Robin Frederick joining me on Monday, October 27th, and she is going to do her top 10 songwriting hacks. So I'm curious to see what she considers to be her top 10. That'll be cool. And Charles Noof is the winner. Yay, Charles. I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name. It could be Neuf, because it's Neuf, like Neumann microphones. I Americanized it because I don't know if you're living in Germany or if your German grandparents are still alive to correct my bad translation. I don't know. Anyway, congratulations, Charles. So you should email liz@taxi.com. It's in French. Oh, neuf is 9. Oh, I neuf. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
There you go.
Yeah, I took French 101 4 years in a row. They were so happy when I graduated high school. Liz@taxi.com. She will connect you with Ronan, and we'll work out a time in the days leading up to the rally. He can look at his final schedule, which we'll send out in probably a week to all of our panelists and mentors and such, and then be able to tell you, like this time, Friday at 5 p.m., yeah. All right. So congratulations, Charles. Ronan, it's always such a pleasure. I literally,
Absolutely, for me too.
we have never hung out other than for doing taxi TVs and maybe road rally stuff. And I always think after we click off of these shows, I'm going, man, if we did the two of us just hanging out in a control room, just listening to great records and talking about why we love them. Ugh.
That's
Anyway, yeah. Now that we're on opposite coasts, and well, sometimes we're actually closer on the other side of the world than we are
We'll
here.
do it in Israel or Italy. You pick. Your pick.
There you go. All right, man. Well, thank you all for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure, and can't wait to see you at the rally in like 4 weeks, a little less than 4 weeks. Scary. And see you guys at the rally too. And in 2 weeks with Robin Frederick for another exciting episode of Taxi TV Live. Bye, you guys.